Okay, we'll go ahead and get started here as some folks are still coming into the session. My name is Richard Sebastian. I am the Director of Open and Digital Learning at Achieving the Dream, and I have the privilege of moderating this session today that we've called Finding the Right Fit. And it's the third concurrent session, but it really is on your adaptive courseware journey, the place that maybe you want to start. And now that you have some information about using data and faculty training and student perceptions, and a lot of the other information that has been some of the great sessions that have come out today in this showcase, kind of wind back to the beginning. And if you or your institution is thinking about adaptive courseware, or thinking about adding adaptive courseware, we're going to be able to talk a little bit about that, what you can do, and some of the experiences of the faculty who participated in the Every Learner Everywhere project are some of the experiences they had. Before I get started with a very short presentation, I'd like to introduce our panelists today. Our first panelist is Ronit Merkin. She is the Associate Teaching Professor of Mathematics at Florida International University. And then
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi. Yeah. We also have Jeffrey Olimpo. He's the Associate Professor of Biological Sciences at University of Texas at El Paso.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be with you all today.
And again, go ahead and throw up your name, title, and institution in the chat as we get started. But like I said, where I wanted to start today was thinking about the actual task of choosing adaptive courseware. And there's a fairly new tool that's been developed that is really helpful that you might want to keep in mind today as you hear both Ronit and Jeffrey talking about their experiences as maybe a place that you want to start. And the tool is called Course Gateway, and the URL is www.coursegateway.org. And I've just got some screenshots today. I don't want to risk going out onto the internet, but do a quick overview just to give you an idea of how you can use it and what you can use it for. So when you go navigate to Course Gateway, you see basically on the landing page, there's kind of three choices that you can, or three directions you can take on the website. So it's pretty clean and simple. The first is search products. The second is help me get started. And then you can learn more about the tool and the project that created it. Search products is really where you want to go. And when you click on that, you're taken to a page that on the left-hand side, you'll see gives you a kind of filter. And so if you have a particular LMS that you're using that you need to integrate, if you got a specific price tag or budget that you're working with, if you only want adaptive courseware in a particular discipline, right? You can kind of filter based on what your needs are, either as a faculty member or as a college or a department. And on the right-hand side, what you'll see is the kind of the results that pop up. And so the kind of courseware titles that kind of fit your needs are displayed there for you to kind of review. And there's a lot of really helpful information within these within the results. So when you select one, so for example, the selected Cogbooks courseware, you'll see that it gives you kind of a rating system on 4 different kind of ratings, which I'll talk about in a second, and a little bit of information on costs and things like that. And then when you click on the actual title, it gives you quite a bit of information on that courseware. Gives you some pricing, it gives you some ratings, it gives you a kind of a narrative summary. So there's a lot of really good in-depth detail that really help you narrow down or eliminate particular titles that you may have been looking at, especially if you don't know a whole lot about adaptive courseware or you're kind of starting fresh. really the Help Me Get Started button is just a kind of a simplified filter that we looked at before. So it just gives you really just 3 points to start with: price, your LMS integration, and in the discipline that you're looking for. But it takes you to the same results page. And then you can check some of the other filters if you want to kind of narrow those down. And then on the Learn More tab, there's some information about the project, and but also it gives you the kind of rating system and what these ratings mean. So it's rated on efficacy, so you'll see kind of what that means to this tool. Equity is also on there, so how does the courseware kind of integrate student representation and provide student supports, etc. Functionality, obviously. So how usable is it, customizable, and then kind of systems capabilities, kind of probably around your college's SIS and LMS. So really just just a kind of a reference for you as we talk about finding courseware and how to implement it, and some of the kind of nuts and bolts of kind of doing this kind of work. This might be a good place for you to start, and kind of at least finding some titles that might work for you. All right. So without further ado, we want to get hear from our panelists today, and so I thought we'd start with Ronit talking about her experience at Florida International University with adaptive courseware in engineering, calculus 1 and 2. So Ronit, you want to tell us a little bit about your experience?
Sure. So, one of the issues that we have at FIU, and I'm sure it's the same for pretty much across the board for most universities, is that students, when they get to the higher level mathematics, they've sort of forgotten some of the stuff that they've learned earlier on, right? So you get students in Calc 1 who don't remember how to factor, who don't remember how to find the domain of a function, et cetera, things like that. Many reasons why. That's a whole other topic for another time. But the idea basically was to take a look and say, okay, well, what can we do with these students? Because faculty will complain. I had to spend half of my class teaching my students how to add fractions, right? Or I would, put some videos up for them, but I don't think they're watching the videos. So the question was, what could we put directly into the course that would allow the students or sort of force the students to do this sort of review? So what we looked at, and this was sort of a project that had started actually in college algebra, and we looked at engineering calc. For us, that was a really good place to work, simply because it's a smaller course with fewer sections, right? So if you look at Calc 1 is, you've got like 22 sections of Calc 1. This is like 3 or 4 sections. So it was a good place to begin to implement this. And the idea was to sort of create this weekly, just-in-time adaptive courseware, that course work that would allow students every week to review the content they needed for that week. And adaptive in the sense that pretty much set up with, like, let's say anywhere from 5 to 10 main questions. If students could do them, they're good, they're done, right? They do the 5-10 questions, maybe it takes them 10 minutes, maybe it takes them 8 minutes, whatever it takes them, and then they can move on to the material for the week. If they don't get it right, then it basically opens a map backwards of content that we built in order to sort of remediate and help them build back up to that learning content that we know that they need to be. Because, for example, quadratic formula, if you're struggling with radicals or with simplifying radicals, it would sort of build you backwards, essentially. So that was the idea. We definitely needed in something that was OER, that was free for our students, because we have a very diverse student population. Over 50% of our students are on Pell Grants. So we definitely, adding something to the students that would cost them more money was not an option. We really were looking for something that we could implement that would not cost them any money, something that integrated directly into Canvas. And so what we use is something called iMathAS, which is an open source, open educational resource. And we basically built all of the content ourselves. I don't know, Richard, do you want me to talk more specifically? Do you want me to stop there? Tell me where you want me to go with that.
Sure, you tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so part of the idea was, we had looked at other stuff initially, and the feeling on the part of the faculty really was that we wanted to have control over what the mistakes we thought our students would be making, how we were building those backward maps. And so we really wanted to have control over that content. We built weekly questions. We built examples into it. So if a student doesn't get something right, it would show them a worked out example. We have like an adaptive learning question where they can sort of take them through the problem as they answer different parts of the problem. We have videos that we've put in. So those are sort of some of the stuff that's given to the students as additional resources. It still has more to be blown out, to be honest. So it's sort of like we've gotten through, I would say, it's done and it's running, but it definitely needs more to be added to it. The other reason that we were building the content ourselves, in all honesty, was to sort of get buy-in from faculty, because that's really important, because you don't want to say to faculty, here, you need to use this in your class, right? You have to use this. It's more like, hey, you're going to be a part of this project. You're going to help us write these questions. And faculty did that. They met every week for an hour or so at a time, writing questions for each week. They really spent the time looking at the content and saying, what do we need our students to know in order to solve these problems for this week? And I think that was really key. It was really important to get faculty to put in the effort for it, because then they were very willing to include it in their course. So the first semester we did Engineering Calc 1, and then we worked to do for Engineering Calc 2. And the nice thing about that was all the work that we did in Engineering Calc 1 was able to be used in Engineering Calc 2. So you didn't have stuff that had to be written sort of all over from the beginning. You could pull from that kind of stuff. And in iMathAS, you just keep everything in your library. All the questions are there, and there's so many other questions. So you don't even necessarily have to write and code every question if you know what it is that you're looking for. So the other thing that I will say about it, because we call these prerequisite modules, because it's the prerequisite content. So what we found is on the part of faculty, it was really key to get their buy-in so they'd be willing to use it and encourage students to use it. For students, in order to encourage them to use it, what we did was we essentially tied it to current content. So this won't open up in Canvas until you complete the prerequisite module. And that was the way we got students, like let's say they have written homework every week. So the written homework will not be accessible to you. The Dropbox will not be accessible to you until you complete the prerequisite material. And the idea here was really to get the students to do it. And they do sometimes. Sometimes it takes a little bit of encouragement on the part of the faculty. And again, having instructors that believe in it will lead instructors to encourage their students to do it, see the reasons behind why it's good, say to students, hey guys, you were supposed to have done this in the modules this week. I shouldn't be having to explain to you why, when you take the, I don't know, integral of e to the x, it's e to the x. You know what I'm saying? Like those kinds of things. So it sort of gives you that ability. So that was pretty much our journey, and we have them done, and there's room always to tweak and such, but that's pretty much what we did. I will say that iMathAS is not necessarily the prettiest of platforms, but it works perfectly well, works nicely. It's fairly user-friendly. For someone who does no coding at all, I found it very easy to write questions, to copy questions and write them and adjust them. And that's pretty much what I have to say on this subject.
Thank you. Can you see my screen okay?
Nope, it's all blurry.
It's all blurry, good. Well, it looks like, there we go. Rooney and both Jeffrey and Rooney shared some, lessons learned, implementation strategies from their experience that they wanted to kind of make sure that we highlighted. And Rooney, feel free to jump in if you want on a particularly important topic. Garnering administrative support is pretty foundational expectation. And you did mention already your faculty buy-in was a big reason for the OER
Yeah.
You can go in with it, kind of developing your own content and creating your own platform. And you can do that, when you develop your own content, you can, use a kind of backwards design process to map your specific course objectives rather than, adapt it from a software title.
Something that's already there and existing, right? Exactly.
Yeah. Pilot in 1 or 2 sections, which I assume you did.
Yeah, that's what we did. And the sections are small, so it also gave us.
Looks like you're frozen there a bit. All right. Technical issue there.
As opposed to, oh my God, now I have to make changey sections.
We lost you there for a bit.
Did I lose you for a second there?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. My screen just went crazy. Survey students, refining the project and adapting to other sections.
Yeah. So we do a survey. We do a survey every semester at the end of the semester, a gateway survey. And we've added in important questions to sort of get feedback from the students to see what they think, what their thoughts are, what we could do to improve it. Was it user-friendly on their end? Did they find it helpful, et cetera, et cetera? Because then you can make changes because you're going to need to revise as you move forward.
Right.
So.
Great. Well, thanks for the overview. Let's switch now to Jeffrey to hear about his experience at University of Texas. Take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. So again, hi, everyone. My name is Jeff Olimpo from the University of Texas at El Paso. And similar to Ranit, our journey really began in thinking about how to integrate open education resources, or OER, and adaptive technologies across our 2-semester introductory biology sequence for majors. So this included a course that was a fundamental cell and molecular biology course and an introductory organismal biology course. And the motivation for our effort was really a top-down push to increase student engagement, success, and retention in these courses. And they are large enrollment courses, by which I mean 150 to 200 students per section, multiple sections running both semesters, both courses running both semesters, even though there is a natural progression from the cell and molecular course to the organismal course. So to help us get started in this initiative, Richard, if you could advance to the first point, please, and hopefully I won't blow up your screen. The first thing that we wanted to do as part of this effort was to really assemble and identify a team of what I call champions. And it was very important. So I was approached, I should backstep a bit and say that I was approached to serve as the faculty lead for this redesign effort or reform effort. And so it was incredibly important to me to gather a team of folks that represented both courses, but that also included and represented the diversity of individuals who are teaching these sections. And so at our institution, both of these courses are taught by faculty or staff, but they range, again, in official title, if you will, from lecturer through more senior tenured faculty. And so it was important to me that we were only focusing on a subset of those individuals at the exclusion of other folks, but that we were creating this team that represented individuals who are involved both in the decision-making and the actual implementation processes. And so our group collectively became about 6 people, 3 and 3, right? 3 representing the cell and molecular side and 3 the organismal side. And we really started, if we move to the next point, by reconsidering how the integration of OER and adaptive resources would allow us to meet our course learning objectives. And so at our institution, there is no common syllabi, there are not common assessments. And so we wanted to ensure, however, that there was some standards that we were meeting in the form of student learning objectives. And in the biological sciences, there's a report by AAAS, right, called Vision and Change, which some of you may be familiar with. And we use that as kind of a guiding document to outline what the core kind of concepts and skills that we want students to acquire were, and then engaged in backward design to create aligned assessments and specific activities. Now, those activities are diverse. Many of the faculty in our department use active learning techniques. So for instance, polling devices, clickers, for example, or other more case study and worksheet based approaches. And so we thought really deeply and for quite a while about how OER and adaptive could complement both the things that we were already doing in our course, as well as those course learning objectives in ways that promoted, right, increased student success and retention, but that also celebrated, quite honestly, the individuality of the faculty, the individuals who are teaching these courses, rather than turning us all into robots. So after spending substantial time doing that, we moved forward. If you can go ahead and click to the next point. In field testing, thank you, multiple platforms. So unlike Ronit, we had a conversation very early on and said, we do not want to design from scratch. We didn't have the resources, we didn't have the manpower. It was just not something that was kind of in our viewfinder, if you will. And so we began, we thought quite simply by testing out the adaptive platform that was coupled with the textbook we were using at the time. And this, again, these platforms were both what I would refer to as being highly structured. And that just means that we were essentially using publisher content with, at least in that earlier implementation, very little modification. We discovered as a result of field testing this earlier platform, which I will not name because we were essentially dissatisfied with it, that it was not providing students with the level of feedback that we felt was necessary. So for example, students were completing work problems for each of the major chapters in the text. But in the event that they had answered the question incorrectly, there was really no formative feedback provided to them about how to enhance their learning or even direction back to the ebook. It was very kind of clean cut and dry, you're wrong. Okay, next question. So we felt that it wasn't maximizing students' learning potential, right, or ability to benefit. We eventually moved on to Cogbooks, which Richard showcased earlier on, and we found that platform to be much more appealing for a variety of reasons. There is some degree of adaptability, so you can integrate your own content. So for example, the faculty that are part of this redesign effort have been integrating their own video content, which has been incredibly relevant in the midst of the pandemic and remote teaching. But Cogbooks provides prefab, if you will, video content, adaptive questions, and a number of other resources we thought were accessible to students or more accessible. In addition, much like Ronit mentioned, we wanted to be incredibly mindful about cost. We also have a very diverse student population. And so the tools that existed previously were very cost prohibitive in our viewpoint. Cogbooks, I think, as we saw in one of the little clips, I mean, it's about $40. And so we thought that that was reasonable, particularly if students can make multiple semester use of these types of resources at little additional cost or adjustment. So once we field tested those different platforms, we settled on Cogbooks as kind of our golden ticket, if you will. And then Richard, if you could please go to the next point. And importantly, we collected evidence along the way. And so we're actively collecting evidence from students regarding the efficacy, the effectiveness of Cogbooks. The anecdotal and formal comments that we received back about the earlier platform were less than savory. So I won't go into details about those. But even formative feedback from students has been really insightful in helping us better, right, our approach to how we integrate OER and adaptive. And then our instructional team has met regularly just to debrief, see how things are going, but also to be forward thinking, meaning one of our ultimate goals in this case was to create a template. We use Blackboard as our LMS at UTEP. And so to create effectively a Blackboard template shell that new faculty who are often assigned to teach these introductory courses could adapt, right, could pick up and tweak. But that we had something there, they didn't feel that they were starting from scratch. And then lastly, on my list of bullet points, I think I have a fifth one, or maybe not. Yeah, is to just make an informed decision, right? So I will totally acknowledge, and I'm sure you can all imagine this, that this took us pretty much almost a year, more than a year, to get all the kinks worked out. And so this was not something we did in 2 weeks before a semester started or whatnot. And I know that may seem incredibly obvious, right, to folks, but just a nod to say that, like anything else, right? Any other innovation that this takes a bit of time, but it's well worth it. And we at least as a group are now much more satisfied with the product that we're using and how it has enhanced the quality of our coursework across that intro series. And I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jeffrey, and thanks to both of you, Ronit, as well. And I just want to acknowledge just if some of the participants had trouble getting in the room, I apologize. Apparently there's some authorization issues happening. So sorry, but you made it. You made it to the session. So yeah, I have a few questions for you, if you don't mind, to kind of drill down on some of your, some of the things what you talked about with your experiences with adaptive courseware. And I want to start my personal interest as someone who works with open educational resources, that you both that was an important facet to your courseware selection. For Ronit, it sounded like it was a cost issue and also a kind of faculty buy-in. And similarly, Jeffrey, although you took a different approach, you wanted to have that kind of control over the content. But with Ronit, did you try any other courseware titles that were, did allow, you to add your own content before you decided? What was that process for moving? Seems like it was a lot of work building your own, as you acknowledged. And what did you do before you made that decision?
So we did work with another company first, and we still did the same thing. We still wanted to build content. That I think that was pretty clear from the get-go. Otherwise we would have just tried to adopt like Alex or something like that. We really felt very strongly that we wanted to think about the process that our students go through and the mistakes that they make along the way. And how to map that backwards. Like there was a lot of intense thought that went, and crazy maps, like for each question, crazy maps that we built, and then built questions for them, and then built content for them. So it, like Jeffrey said, this was not an easy task. Maybe we're all just control freaks. I don't know. Could be. And I think we really at the end of the day, cost became a big factor. Charging our students $30 a usage, it just felt like it was not fair. They're already paying, by the way, I should say, they're already paying for their textbook, right? So they're already paying for their textbook. Exactly. So they're paying $100-something, although now it's less this semester, but they're already paying for their textbook. So to throw that on top of that just did not feel fair. Yeah.
So it's something interesting that you're kind of hinting at, and this is for Jeffrey too, is let's say the professional development opportunity it provided. It sounds like bringing faculty together, talking about your learning objectives, looking at kind of the student journey through the course. Was that something that has something that's kind of stuck around as a practice, or was that something valuable to faculty to kind of go through that kind of collaboration? And Jeffrey, you can answer as well.
Yeah, I would say, if I can jump in on our end, yes. It's always a crapshoot, right? Where I'm like, are these people going to show up consistently over time, right? We all know that we're all incredibly busy and our heads are spinning around. And so making it such that it was manageable also on the side for the faculty, and that we invested that time. So at the risk of trying to cram everything together, which would just have been frustrating, I feel, we ensure that we had very clear milestones about what we wanted to do when we were meeting, right? What the kind of targeted outcomes were for each of these meetings, and so on and so forth. An agenda, in effect, right? And so that people ideally thought or felt that their time was valued, and that this wasn't just some empty ongoing conversation, perhaps. And I will say we started with a small group. We do have quite a few, right? We maybe have 2, sometimes 3 times the number of folks involved in teaching these courses than were in this initial kind of pilot group of faculty. But now in the last year plus, I've found that it's kind of trickled outward, meaning that they may or may not be adopting the same tool, which again was Cogbooks in our case, but they've increased their use of things like OpenStax, right? Freely
Mhm.
available OER resources, or they've used other adaptive tools as ways to integrate either content or opportunities for additional instruction or review or whatnot into their courses too. Um, so yeah, I think it was effective, if nothing else, frankly, at kind of planting the seed and drawing out what our group was already doing, right? I feel fortunate that there was already interest in student engagement, right? And valuing teaching and so on and so forth. And so more than anything else, it kind of created a space for folks to be like, oh yeah, I've thought about doing X, Y, Z, but I had no community, right? I didn't know who to reach out to. I didn't know which next steps to take. And so it fosters, or it has fostered also, a lot of that, just networking and community formation to further these efforts, whether with respect to OER, adaptive, or other forms of student-centered instruction in this case.
Ronit, have you seen something similar? Or?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is we've had the culture at FIU for several years now, where our courses are heavily coordinated. The courses through Calc 2, certainly through Calc 1, and the faculty meet every week. So that's already a part of the culture. So we have weekly meetings for now. I'm actually missing the college algebra meeting right now.
Sorry about that.
But that's okay. It's okay. They don't need me there. So we meet every week just to talk about like what's upcoming, what we observed the past week, et cetera. So the culture of collaboration is already there. So that was an easy, that piece was easy. But getting 3 or 4 faculty to work on it also, and interestingly enough, some tenure track, some non-tenure track. So you had a melding there that was not that their approach was any different per se, but if you have any sort of political leanings within your department, right, of like, this is one facet, this is another facet, so you have people from both sides speaking for the product because they were a part of building the product.
Right.
And I think that's helpful. That was helpful as well. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about the specific kind of discipline you guys work in, and if you could, and we'll maybe start with Jeff. What was needed in a kind of biology, course? What did the courseware need to do that you felt was paramount based on that discipline, kind of what you needed and the kind of the way it's generally approached in the classroom?
Yeah, so for biology, I feel sometimes the mentality, and perhaps this is true for introductory courses widely, is, across our 2 courses, we have to cover the entire textbook, right? And you get this first half or this chunk, and you get the second half. And so it forced us to be really mindful of what we valued in terms of those, again, concepts and skills we wanted to integrate into our courses. And where that was happening, right? So were we creating a lot of redundancy necessarily between the 2 courses? And on the flip side of that, in what ways do we want the 2 courses to talk to each other, so to speak? And so in choosing OER resources and adaptive technologies, we were mindful of very practical things. Again, things like cost, but we also wanted students to be able to have access to a suite of content across their time in both courses. And so, for instance, which Ronit kind of alluded to, they aren't locked out from the cell and molecular content as they move into the organismal course. It's still there for them to use. If not fully, right, there are still resources available to use. So that was important to us to create continuity across the sequence. And then the other thing, frankly, was pitching it at a level that we thought was appropriate to students. So not using more jargon than is already present in a biology course or a science course, right? Or showcasing, for example, only resources that are of stereotypical scientists, right? Or those kinds of things, given our student population. And so there was a clear biology kind of content angle. There was also very much this kind of science society or representation in science angle we were concerned about. And nothing is perfect, as we all know, right? So I'm not saying our choice was like 100% whiz bang right home to somebody about, but I think, you know, we found value in the diversity of kind of approaches, the different media that were used. Again, Cogbooks has questions, they have video content, they have reading content. You can insert your own content, which increased, I feel, faculty kind of ownership over the process, and allows them to insert, if you will, their individuality into the teaching experience. And so quite honestly,
did you include the labs? Or they part of this? Or
we did not. So the labs at the time, we were undergoing a transition in the coordinator for the introductory labs. And so we felt that there was too much upheaval for the time being when this was happening. Those labs are currently actually being and then of course the pandemic hit, but those labs are actually currently being redesigned to be more inquiry and discovery based, where they had been very quote unquote cookbook ish or prescriptive previously. And they are not doing a ton at the moment, I think, for OER and adaptive, because UTEP's back in a face-to-face environment. They were using, I think they were using Lapster and a number of other things while we were fully kind of remote. But
great. Rooney, what about the kind of engineering calculus? And as you were kind of building your own content, did the platform have to do anything in particular, or was it just kind of the content and the platform? Did engineering calculus have specific needs?
So the platform was great because because it codes math very nicely. So that's definitely a plus using iMath AS. Although what I will say is you can use it for any discipline. It's not, it happens to be that it's advantageous for math, but it's not math specific. So we have other faculty, we have one of our physical chemistry professors is using it in their class. We have biology using something similar. So using that platform, it usually works the other way around, right? Platforms are good for most disciplines, but then when it comes to math and trying to code in math, that's where you run into an issue. So this happens to do that beautifully. And so that was, and it's free. So that's, put those two together and pretty much there you go. We had looked at web work at the way beginning, and it just unfortunately felt just too intense. We had spoken to someone who was using it, and he's like, basically 75% of my job is just maintaining it. And we kind of looked at that and said, no, thank you. We really don't want that. We don't want that headache. So.
Right. Great. So if I'm going to kind of focus a little bit on you as individual faculty members and teaching with this courseware, was there a difference in kind of how you taught and kind of your, how you taught before, if you think about the non-adaptive courses or sections that you had, was it a different experience teaching? How so? And could you compare those experiences? Rooney, we'll start with you.
So I have not taught the engineering calc 1 and 2, okay, but we use something similar in our college algebra and in our pre-calc algebra and trig course. So I can speak to that because it's built around the same process essentially. Sure. And it's something that we were able to use as buy-in for faculty to engage in the product. And that is, you gain so much class time by not having to reteach your students stuff they were supposed to have learned in previous semesters. I mean, that's really it. And it also gives you the excuse to say to students, like I said earlier, I'm not teaching this. This is covered in the modules. If you have questions, you can ask me after class, you can email me, et cetera, et cetera. But you have learned this. And it's on you to remind yourself of what is needed, right? And so, and it really saved so much class time in that regard, and put a lot of the onus on the students to say, hey, you can't forget this from semester to semester. This just builds, all this math builds from one semester to the next. So if you didn't get it then, you got to get it now. And that's, it's really a time saver, I would say.
Great. How about you, Jeffrey?
Yeah, so for me personally, I tend to use all kinds of different instructional approaches in my course. I routinely, almost every semester, with some exception, teach our intro molecular course. Um, and so I like to infuse clickers and case studies and graphic organizers and concept maps and all kinds of other different strategies. And I think one of the valuable, or perhaps one of the most valuable pieces about integrating adaptive into my course section was the fact that it frankly forced me to be much more explicit in how I thought about addressing um, student misconceptions largely, right? So there was a tendency early on, I feel, to simply assign or use adaptive as a homework tool and then do this, right? The students did it and then we never thought about it ever again. And so it has made me, again, much more mindful of, for instance, interpreting some of the dashboard feedback, right? The reports and other things that the platform generates to say, oh, they really struggled with X. So let's spend the first 10 minutes of class, right? Doing a permutation of a problem that they found in the homework and talking about it, right? In groups. And so there was more scaffolding in essence, rather than having students perhaps just see it as another thing they had to pay money for and do. And so that benefits me because, of course, over now multiple semesters, you can see more consistently where those misconceptions lie, right? Where they tend to pop up most frequently. And so that's also allowed me to tweak the content of my course ahead of time, to also, again, be more intentional about addressing some of those potential pitfalls, if you will, for students.
Thank you.
Sure.
You give me a nice chance to segue into my question about kind of data, and as you know, that as you mentioned, how useful, it sounds, Jeffrey, like it was useful to me, but to you, but how useful was that data that you get from the Courseware platform in kind of seeing kind of students that were struggling, or identifying them and being able to respond to them, and if that has been helpful and something that you use kind of regularly, and Ronit, does your platform have that? And do you use, so does your platform have kind of a data analytics back into it?
So it does, but we haven't been using it enough to really make a difference at this point in time. It does. There's ways to pull the data so you could see, like from a particular week, how much of the maps students used overall, right? Like if all students easily did question number 1, but question number 2, a lot of them required a lot more back mapping, right? So it is there. It's definitely, I can say, not being used at this point in time.
Great.
I would add that it can seem very overwhelming depending upon what platform you're on, right? I mean, it's like, let's pull out every bell and whistle to show you every possible thing. So you have to be a bit discerning in which content you choose to pay attention to. For a few of us, at least in the biology sequence, we also make use of, Blackboard has a retention center option in it that lets you kind of track student progress and then generate these automated emails to say like, oh, flag the student if they've fallen below this threshold, or they've done particularly well on this assignment, or so in some sense, we've used a combination of both to try to create a more targeted approach. So that we can reach out, or a more individual rather approach for students, so we can reach out to them. Again, that takes, quite frankly, a bunch of extra time. But for us, it was a decision or a direction we decided to move, largely because of our class size, right? It is hard to connect one-on-one with students, even if you're kind of walking around and chatting with them as they're working or whatnot. All of our classrooms are stadium style seating, so 200 students, I mean, it's filled, right? And so we thought that this was hopefully another effective way to try to create more individuality, right? One-on-one interaction with our students.
Right. So we have a few minutes left in this session, and I want to see if there's any questions we have in the chat. But first, let's talk about your students' experience, or their reaction. Ronit, how have your students responded to using this? Do they like it? What are some things they do like, and what are some challenges that you may see with your students?
Students do like it. Those, I think you will always have those students who will find it to be annoying, and those students who will really appreciate what it does for them. And then there's a chunk that just falls somewhere in the middle there, right? But I've definitely had students say it's very helpful, that it really, like I said, reminds them. Nobody remembers stuff from one semester to the next. So it definitely helps jog their memory. It helps give them the tools that they need. I've seen students, you know, that we have in the math lab walking around, working on the problems. And I think that a big piece of that of student appreciation has to do with messaging on the part of the faculty, right? So faculty needs to push this as something positive, push this as this is not just busy work for you, this is for your benefit. Like, and it needs to be done several times throughout the semester. Doing it just once at the beginning and explaining that it's an assignment for you to do, not going to get very far, right? But I think that there's a more positive attitude towards it, the more positive the instructor themselves is.
So I saw you, thank you, Ronnie. I saw you shaking your head, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I think setting expectations is obviously important. Letting students know why you're doing what, I mean, that's true of anything, I would argue, but why you're doing what you're doing. I think the biggest plus on our end, so the reception from students was largely positive. The biggest plus was probably accessibility. So students did not feel it was a headache to log into the platform, to access the content, to complete assignments, to know where they stood in terms of accuracy, right, or performance or whatnot. So user friendliness and accessibility, I think, was the biggest plus from students. The biggest downside was probably the actual level of customization. Again, we're using a prefab product. We're not in the Ronit camp, at least quite yet, right? And so there were times when some of the content that was integrated through the platform was not 100% relevant to what had happened in class. So maybe it covered additional information, or it didn't cover these, or, you know, accentuate the same kind of key points that the instructor had. And but thankfully, the frustration with that was relatively minimal on the part of the students. But that was probably the biggest quote unquote headache or negative that we heard from students.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. We're running out of time, but I want to check in with Mike Brokos from APLU. Are there any questions that you've found in the chat that we have time for?
Yeah, there was one question, I guess, that both panelists could speak to from Holly earlier on. She asks, are there any specific mechanisms that facilitate your decision-making on whether to adopt a digital tool?
So I can speak to that. You know, absolutely. First of all, Holly, I'm not sure if you mean specifically the digital tool, but to use a digital tool, yes, because we wanted something adaptive so that students, again, who knew the math could get through it quickly, but who needed more background and more help could delve further backwards as far back as they needed to go in order to build themselves back up into the content. And that was something that needed to be digital. We also have our students doing, you know, we use a Pearson textbook. So they're doing homework on my math lab. So they're already working in that space. They're doing all their stuff on Canvas. So it made the most sense for it to be a digital tool in that regard. Yeah.
Thanks. Jeffrey?
Yeah, I would just echo that and say that I think, again, having a tool that was easily accessible for our students, that was cost effective, that was effective, right? And not a steep learning curve for the faculty, the folks who are going to make use of it on the instructor side. All of those things funnel into, and some peer pressure, quite honestly, right? But all of those things funnel into the decision to pursue adaptive and OER.
Thank you. Any other questions from the participants? You can unmute yourself or enter it in the chat. Okay. Well, please join me in thanking Ronit and Jeffrey for sharing their experiences today and being with us. It was really helpful and to hear about this process. And I think, you know, we're going to really kind of help folks who are kind of on this journey, help them kind of in the decision making, particularly OER as an ingredient as well, and also kind of building your own platform as one option too. So thanks a lot for being here, and thanks everyone for coming today. Take care.
You have a great day.
Thank you all.
Be sure to go to the closing plenary coming up. So don't leave yet. Take care.